Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, your packed snapshot of the week's biggest business stories, their context, their relevance and impact. I'm Govindraj, Ethiraj. The Union Budget 2016 was notable for its focus on the agriculture and rural sector. Several new schemes and initiatives were announced or budgets increased to areas ranging from infrastructure and employment to irrigation and crop insurance. While the thrust has been welcomed, what will be the challenges in effectively rolling out these initiatives in a way that the challenges posed by 2 years of agrarian stress could be addressed? What should be the metrics to track to ensure optimum execution of some of these initiatives? To discuss all of this, I'm joined by Joshi, Chief Economist of CRISIL, and Sujan, Hajra, Chief Economist of Anand, Rathi Securities. Sujan, welcome, and welcome too. You've been pointing out in your report some of the challenges faced by the agrarian economy and the urgent steps required. Now, the budget obviously has leaned heavily towards the agriculture and rural sector now, and there are a slew of measures that have been announced. Walk us through what is the most significant in those steps and what are the steps that are likely to have the most impact.
Well, I think as you rightly pointed out, the tilt is clearly towards agriculture, but I think government doesn't have enough resources to fully address this. And also I think the overall picture on agriculture, for example, how is the farm profitability going to improve? I think that's not very clear. But let me come to the specific things that they have done. Clearly, I think the rural economy is suffering from the lack of rains for 2 years, and also I think thrown in excess rains in between. So 3 weather shocks, and on top of that, the non-agriculture farm opportunities are also not very good, and the wage rates there had come down. So I think these were the 2 issues. I think the farmers not only work in their fields but also work outside their fields. So I think from that perspective, the focus on NREGA, the focus on the non-NREGA expenditure, which is creation of roads, I think providing safety net to the farmers in terms of crop insurance, etc. I think those are very positive steps. They'll help in hedging the farmer against some of the risks, and also I think in providing some alternate opportunities. So that is, I think, so far so good. As far as the irrigation is concerned, I think the immediate benefits will not be visible, I think, of whatever government is doing. It is going to take time, and we all know that the major problem as far as the unirrigated areas are concerned, I think, is with respect to crops like pulses, crops like oil seeds, even horticulture for that matter. Only about 20% of the area is irrigated there. So I think there will be, so these will remain the pain points going ahead. I mean, if the monsoon fails. Having said that, I think the rural focus overall, and if you are blessed with a normal monsoon, I think we are looking at a situation where the driver of consumption growth will tilt towards the rural side. I think in the last 2 years it has been urban. So this year, I think if I were to bet on rural consumption, I would do that, because this is also expected to be a La Nina year where I think you might get plentiful rains. So I think overall the farm sector, the rural sector is expected to do better in 2016-17 as a consequence of both the budget focus and the blessing from the rains.
Sujan, so one of the things that this budget has leaned towards again is physical infrastructure in rural India, not so much agriculture right now, but physical infrastructure as opposed to social spending or social infrastructure. So do you see that shift actually delivering more benefit or value over the longer term?
Yes and no. For example, if you look at the public investment in agriculture, that has been the biggest challenge. There hasn't been much public investment in agriculture almost for 2 decades. So obviously you need physical infrastructure there. For example, the storage facility, for example, the connectivity, for example, irrigation. These are extremely important steps. But when we talk about rural economy, what we lose focus on how many people are agriculturalists, in the sense how many people are landholding. If you look at that, it's not more than 15% of the the rural population. Or 15% of the overall population which is engaged in agriculture are actually landholders. So if you are talking
of agriculture, which in turn is about 50% of total population.
Agriculture, roughly speaking, supports 66% of the population of the rural economy. And in terms of number of people, if you look at the number of landless agriculturalists, the number is something close to 15 crore. So the point is that, and then if you look at the marginal farmers, then another more than 10 crore people are there. So the point which I'm trying to say is that I'm talking about only the workforce. I'm not talking about people. So if you
got it. Yeah.
So the point what I'm trying to say is that, so if you want to elevate the condition of the rural economy, your focus only cannot be to make agricultural remunerative, because for large majority of the population, it actually doesn't matter, because at least not directly. So what I think is innovative about this government, that they are trying to, at least they're aiming, whether they will be successful, that's a different thing altogether, to get the public investment into agriculture. Second, in terms of benefit transfer, they are trying to make it pretty focused. And the third thing which they are trying to do is trying to make the crop insurance more predictable. So, and more remunerative from that perspective. So, I think these are the three things which are different in this budget, and which should, at least in the medium to longer term, benefit agriculture.
Right. So, DK, so we have the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, the Mantri Krishi Sanchay Yojana. I mean, between insurance, irrigation, so it covers the a wide swath. Now, tell us about the challenges of implementing this. I mean, announcing it is one part of the job, rolling it out and actually ensuring it reaches where it's supposed to reach is potentially the larger challenge that lies ahead.
Well, I think first of all, you need to, as you rightly pointed out, the implementation is always a challenge, and I think so. I would only give 2 cheers to the announcements. I think the third cheer is for what happens, whether it gets implemented properly or not. So I think as far as the crop insurance scheme is concerned, I think identifying the loss of crops, etc., I think you need to put in mechanisms in place, and you need to front load it, because I think there is the agriculture season is going to start soon. So I think you need to start working on it as soon as possible. I think if we don't see signs of that, I think then the effectiveness of what has been announced will go down. So I think similarly with irrigation also, I think as far as the large irrigation projects are concerned, I am a bit skeptical about them. But yeah, there are a lot of other measures like creating short-term catchment areas and so on and so forth, using the rural labor for creating check dams, etc. I think the smaller minor irrigation kind of stuff, I think that is where you need to focus on.
What are the lessons from the past? When I mean, it's not like this is the first time we've announced schemes. Of course, the magnitude may be larger this time, but if there were 1 or 2 lessons that we were clearly to keep in mind as we go ahead, even for those who are watching what is happening in the economy.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the irrigation spend is only about 2% of the total spend, as if you put the states and central government together. So it's not a large part of the spend in any case. Now, I think the lesson is, as far as the larger irrigation schemes are concerned, many of them don't see light of the day. I think that's so that's why I said I'm a bit skeptical on that side. But the smaller irrigation schemes, I think the challenge would be to generate employment and dovetail it with creation of assets. I think which is preservation and conservation of water, etc. I think that is where you need to synchronize, and that is the challenge. I think that has not been done too well in the past.
Sujan, if you were to look at you yourself talked about the subsidy direction and the effective subsidy direction. You talked about, between irrigation, between investment in incomes. Where would you place the most emphasis in terms of execution in the coming year?
See, I think in terms of the modality to deliver it, whatever studies we have, the more decentralized you make, the better is the utilization, and better
so
is the.
So when you say decentralization, you mean via states, or?
I would say more at the panchayat level. So you have to effectively implement, and it's very encouraging to see that there has been a specific focus of this budget to send the money to the local authorities, both at the panchayat as well as at
2.87 lakh crores directly to local bodies. Yeah.
So what I think that's the right approach, because until unless, see, one size doesn't fit all any longer. If you have looked at the 14th Finance Commission report, also they also want to devolve more resources directly to the states, because states' needs are different. Similarly, the needs of every village, every block, every district are very different in terms of infrastructure.
Right. And you're saying this budget shows an understanding of that.
This is a starting. As DK said, the details lies in implementation, and that's how it's actually effective. But in terms of direction, I'm satisfied.
Okay. DK, if you were to look ahead, what are the one or two things that you will be watching for? I mean, the indicators. I mean, obviously monsoon is the one big thing which could, of course, shift fortunes positively. But what else would you be watching out for?
Well, I think it's rather difficult. We monitor the non-agriculture part rather effectively, but the agriculture part is not monitored that effectively. I think so. What I would be looking out for is what kind of from the budget perspective is the money going towards the scheme. I think what is the progress on that. I think we have monthly reports from the CAG, I think, which tell you about allocation of resources. So I would be watching. First step is whether the money is going into, because many a times it doesn't get spent. I mean, so we have unspent money left in many of the allocations. So I would first look at whether the cash is flowing into this sector or not as promised in the budget.
Right. Last word, Sujan. What's the one metric that you would be tracking?
Narega employment.
Okay.
Because these are almost coterminous, and that's where you get huge amount of disaggregated data and close to real time.
Right.
So obviously, if the holistic focus is on rural economy, Narega spending will reflect that.
Right. So Narega spending, let's look at how the money is flowing and track it, and then we get a sense on how the objectives that have been outlined in the budget actually play themselves out. Thank you both for joining me. We need to go in for a break. Coming up on the other side, we look at the fine print in the tax part of the Union Budget 2016. Stay with us. Welcome back to Policy Watch. The Union Budget 2016 has been seen as tax friendly, particularly from a tax administration point of view. On the other hand, there are no major changes in personal or corporate tax. The government had earlier spoken of reducing corporate tax in its path towards bringing rates down from 30% to 25%, but that has been held in abeyance. On the other hand, there have been some moves to tax the super rich, including a tax on dividend. Now, there is some concern that the issue of retrospective tax has not been laid to rest. On the indirect tax front, somewhat expectedly, there was no mention of GST. Now, so the larger question is, what is the fine print that we still need to focus on, and has this budget truly begun a path towards a non-adversarial tax regime? To discuss this, I'm joined by Alok Agrawal, Senior Director, Deloitte, Haskins and Sells, and Nikhil Bhatia, Executive Director, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Nikhil, let me start with you. If we were to go into the budget announcement in retrospect, what would be the key highlights that you feel are significant in their impact and that we will see over the next year or so?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest impact that has pretty much touched everybody today is the Provident Fund changes. I guess we'll talk about it as we go along. Another big one is probably the so-called voluntary disclosure scheme or amnesty scheme as it come out. Once again, after many promises, it's come back again, but there are, commercial model and tax questions on that. The levy, levy on payments to non-residents for advertisement, etc. Again, a new concept. Equalization levy, which is in the context of BEPS. I think that's an interesting one. So I think those are some of the big things to my mind. Which
anything that we've missed in the initial pourings over?
To me, one of the biggest and the highest point of this, which is a one-line sentence somewhere in the speech, was the fact that the finance minister actually said that if the tax officers do not give order giving effect to the appeal orders, then we will pay higher rate of interest and we will make him accountable. To me, that is one of the biggest points in the budget, because all these years we've yearned for accountability from the tax department. First time finance minister on the floor of the house has said we will make him accountable. How they will do is a different issue, but to me that is the biggest
statement of intention.
That is the biggest point, and that kind of marks the undertone of the whole simplification and rationalization, paperless, transparent, and so on and so forth.
Right, and we'll spend a little more time on that. Alok, broad takeaways on the individual side, tax?
So, there is a clear theme in terms of trying to provide some relief to the small taxpayers and trying to collect from those, let's say, who can afford it, so to speak. So, on both fronts, he's made changes. And even
would you say that the super rich tax is more than proportionately the benefits that have been given to the not so rich or really poor people?
No, it's very difficult to put it that way because of the stark difference in the numbers. So,
No, I'm saying if you're saying a 3,000 rupee rebate versus,
So let's say,
I don't know if it's a fair way to put it, but I'm asking.
But so let's get into the numbers. So let's say for an individual up to 500,000 rupees of annual income, he gets another 3,090 rupees, tax plus surcharge under the new rebate. And a person who's, let's say, earning about 1.1 crore rupees has to pay an additional tax of about 96,000 odd rupees, so slightly less than 1% on account of the increase in surcharge from 12 to 15. Now, that doesn't complete the picture. The picture is completed only if you look at the number of taxpayers in both categories. And the reality in India is that the category of over 1 crore taxable income is very few as compared to the lower income group,
right?
And therefore you don't know how the numbers play.
So how would you categorize this then? I mean, would you say that this is friendly towards the small taxpayer? Is it indifferent, or?
I mean, he's definitely given some relief to the individual taxpayer. So this is one. So while there was expectation of increase in the basic exemption limit from 250,000 to 300,000, but instead of that, they have done this change. And again, there's a clear rationale behind it, because they want to keep the tax base as wide as possible, and by increasing the basic exemption limit, they would kind of fall off the radar. So they have kept them within that and given the tax rebate. So there's one rationale behind approaching it in that manner.
Right. So Nikhil, one of the expectations on the corporate side was obviously a reduction in corporate tax, for which for budgetary reasons has not been done. Is there anything else that you felt was something that India Inc. was looking out for but has not got?
No, I think the roadmap to how these rates will be reduced. So to my mind, the fact that he's actually put a 25% rate on a small startup thing, he reduced it by 1% for the small ones, is clearly an indication. But the roadmap as to how it will come. So good thing is that the roadmap for the phasing of the incentives is come. So people know, and hopefully in that same kind of spirit, next year we should see. I hope we see, from 30 to 28 to 26 to whatever, 25. But that is not been spelled out. Clearly, it will not happen that it will go all the way and then drop it by 5, I expect. So, hopefully, we should see it, and there is an indication to that effect, but clearly not
right. So, if you were to take a step back, you said that one of the things that they've clearly done in terms of intention is to make it friendlier, putting the onus on the taxman. On the other hand, you also have a situation where there's still unhappiness over the fact that the Vodafone or the retrospective tax issue has not been laid to rest. So, if you were to add this up, what's your takeaway?
No, I think that directionally they are going in the right sense. So, some of the Vodafone issues are heartburn for a whole lot of intellectuals, so to say. It impacts a few companies, but it certainly impacts the image of the country at large. And here again, to say that you pay off all the taxes which have been struck down by the Supreme Court and will not charge you interest and penalty, debate can go on, will go on forever, and we don't know how the companies, not just Vodafone but others, will also react to it, because they're clearly and similarly even on the other simplifications of interest and penalty, there's a lot many more provisions of that to say, okay, we want to take out litigation, brilliant, let's take it out. Finish it off in quickly by paying in tax and interest and penalty. But the point is, so many of these additions that are made, which are being disputed before the CITs, are such frivolous additions that people will not want to give up. If they are kind of, taxpayers are also making frivolous kind of appeals, that's a good way to finish it. But so directionally it is correct, but I think the tone from the top seems to be correct. I think proof of the pudding will be in eating. How do we implement it at the department level?
Right. So on the individual level, what's the pending or the unfinished part, Alok?
So there's always a wish list.
Apart from the rates themselves, I mean, that's
right. Yeah. There's always a long wish list before every budget, and some of them don't change over the years. So for example, increases in the ATC limits. So again, he's not changed that this time, but tried to provide some relief on the NPS. Then on the long list of allowances which are exempt, let's say there have been education allowance of 100 rupees per month per child. Now things like these haven't been touched for several years, and there has been a lot of demand for reviewing these limits. Last year they had increased the limit for transport allowance exemption, but there are several others which need to be looked at. So those are still not addressed.
And that's creating, you're saying, more paperwork and more logistic challenges, or?
I mean, it's not creating any challenges in that manner, but it doesn't really serve its purpose.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Because
so
the costs
on
are
the other hand, you have
the reality of today's situation is way out of line as compared to the exemption limits that have been provided. So that is the one area, big area from a salaried individual's perspective, which has not been addressed.
Right. And would you think that this budget gives a sense on widening the tax net? We've also seen so many other steps pre-budget about, monitoring cash payments, converting cash to non-cash. All the steps that have been taken in that direction. Do you think all of this is adding up to actually increase or widen the tax base?
Yes, and not only through the budget. Just to briefly comment on measures introduced before the budget. For example, they introduced mandatory reporting of PAN for various type of transactions. All payments, cash or otherwise, 2 lakhs and above. That was introduced a few months ago. And even in the budget, they've introduced the tax collection at source for purchase of cars above 10 lakhs and those kind of things. So yes, without tinkering the basic exemption limit, they've given a tax rebate. So they are trying to do whatever is possible within the overall framework.
Interesting that you mentioned the card, the cesses, one way or the other. Is that all of that making it more expensive and somewhat unfriendly for middle class?
It definitely adds some compliance burden, just like there was an additional compliance burden when you were purchasing property because you have to withhold tax. So it will add on to the compliance burden. But in the government's wisdom, that's what they can think of in terms of trying to catch individuals who may perhaps be falling out of the tax net, but are incurring such huge expenses in terms of buying cars in excess of 10 lakhs, etc.
Yeah, and raise revenue at the same time.
Just on that, there is, to answer your question, there is no increased burden on the taxpayer because that will be a tax collection certificate which will go towards the overall tax credits for the taxpayer.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm saying more citizen. Cost of living.
The cost of but the cost of compliance and headache for people, more and more compliance of throwing it a little bit more.
Right.
But on the individual piece, I have a different take completely. As Alok said, 100 rupees, 200 rupees. It's all, to me, 2 rupees a day banana allowance has no meaning in today's day and age. The real thing is keep your tax net wide by keeping the kind of threshold low, but increase the next slab to 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs, 20 lakhs and bring the top rates up at 25, 30, 50 lakhs of rupees. So and then you get in your rich farmers in the system, which is a politically hot potato. But really, because they equally need to pay their taxes. So I think the way to widen the base is that keep the wider base, bring in all the black money into the system, absolutely bang on. But take away all these flunky allowances and then just check up the limit. Let people decide what they want to do with their money.
Quickly, running out of time. Alok, unfinished agenda. What are the 2 or 3 things that you would have liked to see, but would like to see being addressed in coming weeks?
So definitely the whole controversy on taxation of provident fund withdrawals and employer contributions needs to be addressed. While their intention is very clear in the press release that was issued subsequent to the outrage, but how that is finally heard out in terms of the representations of the community that you can't tax employer contributions in excess of 1,50,000 or you shouldn't tax 40% of the 60% of the entire corpus, which includes employee and employer contributions at the time of withdrawal. So that would be one major item of unfinished business.
Okay, Nikhil.
Yeah, to my mind, directionally all going in the right direction, encouraging people to save, etc. But give the choice of making the investment or spending the money to the people, and only if you want to make something compulsory, incentivize such that people are kind of going there by voluntarily. Really, today
so that's linked to provident fund. But anything on the non-provident fund side?
I think some of the litigation pieces and the DRP in particular, I think one of the things which they said they brought back the appeal against DRP orders away. Now the point is that the fact that the department could appeal against DRP's order allowed DRP to give some very good orders. Now that right has been taken away, one has to hope that again DRPs will continue to give fair orders and not again get back into shell and get bent into litigation. So I think that's
We've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining me. That's all we have time for on Policy Watch this week. We'll be back next week, same time. Thanks for watching.